The cold-hearted demand. He demanded an abortion and walked away. 2 years later, the Millionaire CEO was paralyzed upon seeing his twin daughters at the mall. Liam Thorne had built his entire life on control, that rigid and absolute kind of discipline that left no room for hesitation or compromise. What do you think of a man who puts his career above everything? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more stories like this. As the director of one of the country's largest corporations, his name was synonymous with power. His image projected in luxury magazines as the man who turned everything he touched to gold. He wore success like an impenetrable suit of armor, and for years, he had believed that armor was unbreakable. But when Chloe Reynolds stood in front of him that night, her hands trembling slightly, as she showed him the small plastic test with 2 unmistakable lines, he felt something crack beneath the surface. She searched his face for warmth, for reassurance, for the man she had once believed loved her. Instead, she found only cold steel. His brown eyes, usually sharp with ambition, turned to stone. The silence stretched on, unbearably long, until he finally spoke, his voice low, but merciless. "This isn't the right time. You'll take care of it tomorrow. No discussion." Chloe flinched as if he had hit her. She had thought he might be surprised, maybe even upset. But deep down, she had hoped he would reconsider, that the idea of a child might awaken something tender inside him. Instead, he treated the news as nothing more than a business problem to be solved quickly and efficiently. He didn't ask how she felt. He didn't sit with her in the swirling vortex of fear and uncertainty. He simply issued an order, as he would to an employee who had made a costly error. His gaze was distant, almost bored, and in that moment, Chloe realized the depth of the abyss between them. Her voice trembled as she tried to explain that this wasn't just an inconvenience, that there was a life growing inside her, that she couldn't reduce her child to a problem. She pleaded with him to look past his empire, past the image he so carefully protected, and see her, see them, as something worth more than control. But every word she spoke was met with a wall of silence and indifference. Liam's jaw tightened, and he repeated himself, this time sharper, more cruel. "Tomorrow." It was the last word from a man accustomed to being obeyed. The argument that followed shattered what little was left of their fragile relationship. Chloe's tears didn't move him. Her anger didn't faze him. If you were in Chloe's shoes, would you leave everything behind to protect your child? Or would you stay and fight to change his mind? In his mind, Liam was protecting himself, cutting ties before they could ensnare him, before the vulnerability of fatherhood could dismantle the empire he had sacrificed everything to build. But in doing so, he didn't realize he wasn't protecting himself at all. He was dooming himself to a profound loneliness he wouldn't recognize until years later. That night, Chloe packed her things. She left without looking back, clutching the ultrasound photo she'd had taken that very day. She knew he would never open his heart. Not then. Not when it mattered most. She left his penthouse, its polished surfaces and glistening windows reflecting nothing but emptiness, and walked into a world of uncertainty. Her heart was broken, but it beat to the rhythm of the tiny lives growing inside her, and she swore she would protect them no matter the cost. Liam stayed at the window long after she was gone, staring at the city lights stretching out infinitely below. He told himself he had done the right thing, that one day she would thank him for saving them both from a burden neither of them was ready to carry. He poured himself a drink, convinced he had made the rational, strong decision. Yet, somewhere deep inside, beneath the layers of pride and certainty, a faint unease stirred. He ignored it, just as he ignored the unopened message she left, not realizing that by turning his back on her that night, he had turned his back on the only future that could have made him whole. The story is just getting started, and the next part is even more dramatic. Don't miss it. Make sure to hit the like button and subscribe right now. Part 2. A Mother's Strength. The scene begins with a time lapse of seasons changing over a small, run-down apartment building. The vibrant colors of fall turn to the stark gray of winter, then bloom into the hopeful greens of spring. The camera focuses on a woman, Chloe, walking with a small stroller. Chloe's departure wasn't a dramatic escape into freedom, but a quiet, painful retreat from a life she thought was hers. The city felt colder as she walked its streets with her one suitcase, every light a reminder of the world she was leaving behind. She had no savings to speak of, no family to turn to. The only thing she carried with her was the grainy black and white ultrasound photo folded carefully in her bag, proof of the lives she refused to let him erase. With every step away from Liam's glass and steel fortress, her determination hardened, even as fear gripped her. In the weeks that followed, her world shrank to one of pure survival. She found a rental room in a cramped, disheveled part of the city, with walls thin enough to hear her neighbors' arguments and crying children. But it was all she could afford. She got a job at a small grocery store, standing behind the register for hours each day, her swollen ankles aching as her pregnancy advanced. Customers rarely looked her in the eye, and when they did, it was with impatience rather than kindness. Still, she smiled when she could, because the thought of the two small lives growing inside her gave her a strength she didn't know she possessed. She reminded herself that every shift she completed, every dollar she saved, was a brick in the foundation of the life she was building for them. The pregnancy, however, was unforgiving. Nights became a battle against exhaustion and fear. She often lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling of her rental room, wondering how she would afford medical care, how she would buy diapers or formula, how she would raise 2 children all by herself. Sometimes, in the darkest hours, her mind would drift back to Liam, to the warmth that had once existed between them before ambition and pride had replaced love. She wondered if he ever thought of her, if he regretted the way he had dismissed her as if she were a mistake. But then she'd remember the finality of his voice, the way his eyes had turned to ice, and she would know the answer. She could not depend on him. She would not beg again. As her belly grew heavier, she became the subject of whispers in the neighborhood. Some pitied her, others judged. But Chloe learned to ignore them. She walked to her doctor's appointments alone, clutching her coat around her, and listened intently as the doctor explained the complications of carrying twins. There were risks, she knew, but she nodded firmly and told the doctor she would do whatever it took. Every time the ultrasound wand glided over her stomach and she saw 2 flickering heartbeats, her chest filled with a fierce love that drowned out her fear. These were her daughters, her reason for breathing, and she would endure any hardship to bring them safely into the world. When the day of labor arrived, it was chaos. She was rushed to the hospital, her body racked with pain, her hands gripping the bed rails until her knuckles were white. The room filled with voices, doctors giving instructions, nurses moving quickly, the beeping of machines filling the air. Chloe's vision blurred with tears and exhaustion, but through the haze, she heard the cries. First one, then the other, piercing the air with pure, unadulterated life. They were placed in her arms, tiny bodies wrapped in soft blankets, their hair wet and dark, their eyes blinking open for the first time. She wept as she whispered promises to them, promises she would love them enough for both parents, promises she would never let them feel abandoned. She named them Lily and Sophie, names she had whispered to them in the quiet of her room for months, names that would now carry her hope for the future. The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings. Chloe learned to live in fragments, moments of rest when the girls finally closed their eyes, quick meals eaten cold because there was no time to warm them. Her body ached, her eyes burned from exhaustion, but she found joy in the smallest moments. Lily's first giggle, Sophie's curious stare, the way their little hands would curl around her finger. These moments were treasures greater than anything Liam's money could buy. She watched them grow in awe, marveling at how their personalities began to emerge, how even at such a young age they mirrored one another, yet were so distinctly their own. There were nights she broke down, overwhelmed by the weight of it all, when bills piled up and the fear of failure pressed down on her chest. But then she would hear the soft breathing of her daughters in their cribs, and she would get up again. Love gave her a strength logic said she shouldn't have. She learned to stretch every dollar, to accept the kindness of strangers when it came, and to fight for her daughters in ways Liam would never understand. She no longer thought of him with longing, only with a bitterness that slowly turned to indifference. He had chosen his empire over them, and in doing so, he had given her the chance to discover her own strength. When Lily and Sophie turned 2, Chloe had built a fragile but real world around them. It wasn't glamorous, but it was full of love. They knew the lullabies sung softly at night, the warmth of her arms, and the constancy of her presence. She had lost everything she thought she needed, but in return, she had found everything that truly mattered. And though she couldn't have imagined it then, fate was already weaving a cruel, surprising reunion that would tear open the past she had worked so hard to bury. What do you think will happen when Liam finds out he's a father to twins? Will he try to win them back? Don't miss the next part of this emotional journey. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Part 3. The Unforeseen Reunion. The scene shifts to 2 years later. A fast-paced montage shows Liam at board meetings, signing contracts, and giving interviews. The music is powerful and triumphant, but with an underlying cold, sterile tone. The camera focuses on a prestigious business magazine with Liam on the cover, labeled The Steel Visionary. Liam Thorne never allowed himself to think about the past, or at least, that's what he told himself whenever an unwanted memory tried to surface. His empire demanded focus, his reputation demanded composure, and he built walls of routine and success so carefully that no one in his circle could see the cracks. To the world, he was the man who had it all. A billionaire in his early 30s, impeccably dressed in custom suits, sitting at the head of long, polished tables where men twice his age hung on his every word. He was ruthless in negotiations, unflinching when closing deals, admired for his vision and feared for his precision. Yet no amount of power or acclaim could completely silence the shadows that sometimes crept into his mind when the nights were long and the silence pressed too heavily against the glass walls of his penthouse. He had buried Chloe in the part of his memory labeled mistakes, convincing himself that what he had demanded was necessary, even wise. He told himself she was better off without him, that she couldn't have handled the weight of his world, and that cutting ties had been an act of clarity rather than cruelty. But beneath those carefully constructed lies lay the truth he refused to confront. He was scared. Scared of change. Scared of vulnerability. Scared of letting love unseat him from the pedestal he had carved out of stone. He had chosen his empire because it required nothing but ambition, and in return, he had abandoned something he didn't fully understand until it was too late. The years passed in a blur of contracts, interviews, and global expansion. Liam became the face of corporate success, the man business schools cited, the one magazines called the Steel Visionary. Yet, for all the praise, he often came home to the gnawing emptiness of a man who had traded everything for so little. His assistants whispered about his long hours, his refusal to take vacations, his obsession with control. But none dared question him in person. He went on with the practiced confidence of a man who had never failed. But deep down, he wondered why his victories no longer felt like triumphs. The image of Chloe would sometimes intrude without warning. He'd see her laughing in a fleeting vision, feel her absence like a wound that would never close. He'd ignore it, pour another drink, bury himself in another deal. He had never read her last message, never admitted it to anyone. But the unopened notification still sat on his phone, a silent reminder he could never bring himself to delete. He never looked, because deep down he knew whatever it contained might unravel him, and he couldn't afford to be unraveled. But fate doesn't respect the walls that men build around themselves. On an ordinary afternoon, as Liam moved through the gleaming halls of a shopping mall between meetings, the past collided with him in a way that tore everything apart. He saw her first, Chloe, her blonde hair falling softly over her shoulders, her blue eyes scanning the stores, with the calm concentration of a mother keeping her children close. For a split second, he thought his mind was playing tricks on him, a cruel illusion conjured by guilt. But then he saw them. Two small girls, identical in every feature, with dark hair that shone under the mall lights, and eyes the exact same shade of brown as his own. They held Chloe's hands as they tugged her toward a toy store, their tiny voices carrying the sound of innocent laughter. Liam froze mid-stride, his body rigid, his breath caught painfully in his chest. The world around him went blurry, the chatter of shoppers fading until there was nothing but the sight of those two little girls. His legs refused to move. His empire, his wealth, his carefully curated strength, they meant nothing in that instant, because he knew with absolute certainty what he was looking at. They were his daughters. Chloe turned then, her eyes meeting his. In her gaze, he saw no warmth or longing, only a wall of steel as impenetrable as the one he had once used against her. She pulled the girls closer, her hand gripping theirs with a protective force. Liam wanted to shout, to close the distance, to say something, anything, but his throat seized up and no sound came out. He had faced down hostile boardrooms. He had negotiated with men who would ruin him without a blink, and he had never faltered. Yet here, in the middle of a shopping mall, confronted with the truth he had refused to face, he was paralyzed. One of the girls looked up as they passed, her big brown eyes holding his for a fraction of a second. That gaze penetrated more deeply than any accusation, because in her innocent curiosity, he saw not only himself, but everything he had lost. The first time they had opened their eyes, their first steps, their first words. His chest ached with a guilt so sharp he thought he might collapse. Chloe turned away, leading them out of sight, and just like that, the moment was gone. But Liam stood there, his heart pounding, the understanding washing over him that the lives he had demanded be erased had not only survived, they had thrived without him. That night, alone in his penthouse, Liam poured a drink, but left it untouched. He sat in silence, staring at the unopened message on his phone, the one he had ignored years ago. He knew now what it contained, even without opening it. He hadn't just walked away from Chloe, he had walked away from them. 2 lives, 2 daughters, both with his eyes, both strangers to him. And for the first time in his life, the billionaire who had never known fear felt completely helpless. He realized that all his victories, all his wealth, all his carefully protected pride, meant nothing in the face of what he had lost. What do you think Liam will do now that he's seen his daughters? Will he try to get them back, or will he run away again? Comment with your predictions, and don't forget to subscribe. Part 4. The Path to Atonement. The scene opens with Liam in his office late at night. He is staring at a photograph on his desk, a candid shot of Lily and Sophie playing in a park. Liam barely slept after that encounter at the mall. He stayed awake for the long hours of the night, replaying every detail with an intensity that felt like a punishment. The sight of Chloe's hand, firmly intertwined with the two little girls, remained in his mind like a photograph etched into his memory. He recalled the curve of their cheeks, the way their hair caught the light, and most of all, their eyes, the exact same dark brown as his own. He couldn't escape the understanding that he had denied them even before their birth. And yet, here they were, alive and vibrant, walking alongside their mother as if the world never needed him. The weight of what he had lost pressed down on him until he could barely breathe. In the days that followed, Liam functioned on autopilot. He went to meetings, gave speeches, signed contracts for more money than most men would see in a lifetime. But it all felt empty. His executives praised his sharpness, his ability to see opportunities others missed. But Liam knew his mind was elsewhere. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those little girls. Every time he heard laughter echoing through his office hallways, he imagined their voices in its place. His carefully built empire had never felt so insignificant. He had always believed that wealth could insulate him from regret, that accomplishments could drown out whatever ghosts might haunt him. Now he knew he had been wrong. Money could buy him anything but the years he had already lost. He began to search for them, in small, almost desperate ways. At first, he returned to the mall under the pretense of running errands, scanning the crowds in the hopes he might catch another glimpse. When that failed, he pulled in favors. He made discreet inquiries, through private contacts, using the network that had always ensured he stayed ahead of his rivals. It didn't take long. Within days, he had an envelope on his desk filled with photographs and notes, every detail of their lives compiled into neat lines of text. Chloe lived in a modest neighborhood, far from the gleaming skyscrapers Liam called home. She drove an old car, one that looked too small to carry two children comfortably, and worked part-time at a local store. The twins, Lily and Sophie, attended a nearby daycare. The report described them as healthy, happy, and full of energy, and every photo was proof of it. Liam sat in his office long after the building had emptied, looking at pictures of his daughters running in a yard, playing with toys, clinging to their mother with an unwavering trust. The sight of Chloe hit him hardest. She no longer looked like the woman he remembered, dressed in designer clothes and seated across from him at lavish dinners. Instead, she wore simple clothes, her blonde hair often tied back, her face etched with lines of exhaustion that spoke of sleepless nights and constant worry. Yet, there was a strength in her eyes he had never noticed before, or perhaps one he had destroyed, and she had rebuilt without him. She had raised two children alone, without his money, without his support, without even his acknowledgement. This realization shattered him. For all his power, for all the boardrooms he commanded, it was Chloe who had proven to be stronger than he could ever be. If you were Liam, what would you do after finding them? Would you show up and tell them the truth, or would you quietly watch over them? Liam spent nights looking at those photos. Guilt tore through him with every page. He remembered the cold way he had dismissed her, the cruelty of his order, the arrogance that had convinced him he was above the responsibilities of fatherhood. He had silenced her, ignored her, and walked away. And in doing so, He had abandoned not just her, but them. Now, with every image of Lily and Sophie, he saw how much he had lost. Their first smiles, their first words, their first steps. It was all gone. Moments he could never get back. He hadn't just missed them, he had thrown them away before they ever had a chance to exist. Finally, he couldn't stand the distance any longer. One night, he drove to the neighborhood where they lived, parking his expensive car several houses down so as not to draw attention. From the shadows, he watched as Chloe carried groceries into the house, the twins skipping around her, their laughter echoing on the quiet street. The sound pierced him more deeply than any criticism he had ever received. He gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. Every part of him screamed to get out, to call out to her, to kneel before those girls and tell them the truth. Yet, fear held him in place. The same fear that had once made him demand the unthinkable now held him back from the one thing he wanted most. He stayed there until the lights in the house went out and the neighborhood fell silent. His heart ached with every moment he postponed, every second that slipped through his fingers. But as he drove back to the city, the faces of Lily and Sophie haunted him, refusing to fade. He realized then that he could no longer hide behind excuses or pride. The empire he had built suddenly felt fragile compared to the bond he had denied himself. Chloe's strength had created a life without him, but he would no longer remain a stranger. He couldn't undo the past, but he could fight for a place in their future. And as he pulled into the empty garage of his penthouse, Liam whispered the names he had learned from that report. Lily, Sophie, as if saying them aloud could anchor him to the promise forming in his heart. He wouldn't run away again. This time, he would face the storm he had created, no matter how much it destroyed him in the process. Do you think Chloe will accept Liam? Can she ever forgive him? Make your predictions, and don't forget to subscribe to see what happens next. Part 5, A New Beginning. The scene opens with a long shot of Liam standing awkwardly on a front porch. A light breeze rustles the trees. He knocks softly on a worn wooden door. The sound echoes in the quiet neighborhood. He's dressed in an expensive suit, looking out of place. When Liam finally gathered the courage to approach Chloe, it was not with the imposing presence of a man who had spent his life being obeyed. He came alone, standing on the weathered steps of her modest home, his custom-made suit out of place in the quiet neighborhood. For the first time in his adult life, his hands were trembling. He knocked softly on the door, half hoping she wouldn't answer, and half praying that she would. When the door opened, seeing her hit him harder than any blow he had ever received. Chloe stood there, her hair pulled back, her eyes sharp but cautious, her body angled slightly in front of the two little girls who peered out from behind her legs. Lily was holding a doll. Sophie clung to her mother's dress, her big brown eyes fixed on him with innocent curiosity. For a moment, words failed him. He had rehearsed a dozen speeches in his mind, practiced apologies that sounded almost noble. But standing in front of them, he realized how hollow those words were. The silence stretched painfully until Chloe spoke, her voice firm with a steel edge. "What do you want, Liam?" It was not a question filled with venom, but one that carried the weight of years of betrayal. He swallowed hard, his throat constricting. I needed to see you. To see them." He looked at the twins, his heart aching as they huddled closer to their mother, not knowing who he was. Chloe's jaw tightened, her eyes narrowing. "You already saw us once at the mall. You didn't need to come here." Her voice was clipped, defensive, but beneath it, he thought he heard the faint tremor of old wounds. He shook his head slowly, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "No, that wasn't enough. I can't explain what it did to me, seeing them, realizing what I threw away. I'm not here to make excuses, Chloe. I just want a chance to know them, to be something more than a stranger they'll never remember. Her eyes flashed with anger. She stepped fully into the doorway, blocking his view of the girls. You don't get to decide that now, not after everything. Do you even remember what you said to me? You demanded I end their lives, as if they were an inconvenience? Every word hit him like a whip, and he bowed his head, shame washing over him. I remember, he admitted, his voice raw. And it is the single greatest regret of my life. I can't undo it. I can't erase the cruelty of that night. But I can try to spend the rest of my life making sure they know they are wanted, that they are loved. I can try to be the father I should have been from the beginning. The air between them grew heavy. Chloe's hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. You think showing up now erases 2 years of silence? You weren't there when they were sick, when they woke up screaming at night, when I had to choose between paying rent or buying medicine. You weren't there when they took their first steps, when they called out for someone to hold them. I was. Alone. You don't get to just walk in here and rewrite history because your conscience suddenly caught up to you. Liam felt her words tear him apart, each one a reminder of everything he had lost and everything he had failed to be. He wanted to argue, to tell her he could be different now, but he realized there was nothing he could say to erase her pain. Instead, he nodded slowly, his voice quiet but unwavering. You're right. I wasn't there, and I will never forgive myself for it. I'm not asking you to forgive me either. I'm just asking you to let me try. Not for me. For them. There was a long silence, broken only by the faint sound of the girls whispering to each other behind their mother's legs. Finally, Chloe turned slightly. Her eyes flickered to them before returning to his. If you're serious about this, you start small. You don't just swoop in and play the hero. You will earn every second of their trust. And the first time you break it, Liam, you will never see them again. Ever. Her voice trembled slightly on the last word, but her resolve was clear. Liam's chest tightened, but he nodded quickly, almost desperately. I'll take whatever you give me. I'll show up. I'll stay. I'll fight for them. I don't care how long it takes. Chloe studied him for a moment more, as if looking for the arrogance that had once defined him. When she found none, she stepped aside just enough for him to see the twins more clearly. Lily's eyes widened as she whispered to her sister, "Who is he?" Sophie's brow furrowed in curiosity, her small hand still clinging to Chloe's dress. Liam's heart ached as he whispered softly, "I'm someone who wants to know you, if you'll let me." Chloe didn't reply, but she didn't close the door either. And for Liam, that small act felt like the first crack of light breaking through years of darkness. Standing there, looking at his daughters for the very first time with no crowd or distance between them, he realized this wasn't a negotiation he could win with charm or power. This was the fight of his life, and the only way forward was with humility, patience, and a love he had once been too afraid to give. A family reborn. The scene cuts to a series of quick, heartfelt moments. Liam playing with both girls on a swing set. Chloe is watching from a distance, her posture slowly softening. The tone is hopeful and gentle. The weeks turned into months, and little by little, Liam became a presence in his daughters' lives. No longer just a stranger at the door, but a figure they began to anticipate. He learned to clear his packed schedule, rearranging his calendar that his assistants once guarded with iron precision. All so he could be there when Lily and Sophie held up their drawings or called out his name in their bright voices. At first, they still called him Sir Liam, echoing how Chloe had introduced him. But one night, Lily stumbled and, without thinking, called him Daddy. and the word hit him harder than any praise or award he had ever received. He carried that moment with him like a hidden treasure, repeating it in his mind when the nights grew long and lonely, as if the word itself had the power to keep him anchored. The change in him didn't go unnoticed. His colleagues whispered about how the once unflappable billionaire was now leaving meetings early, how his sharp edge had softened into something more human, how his focus shifted from profit margins to people. He didn't care. For the first time in his life, he understood that success measured in numbers meant nothing compared to the joy of being asked to sit on a rug and help build a castle out of blocks. Sophie loved to hand him pieces, laughing when his tower collapsed and clapping when he tried again. Lily, quieter but just as stubborn, would often cuddle up to his side with a book, insisting he read, even as he stumbled over stories he had never learned as a child. Every moment felt like a lesson, every laugh a gift, every touch a reminder of how much he had thrown away. Chloe remained cautious, her eyes always vigilant, her trust locked behind walls she had built to protect herself and her daughters. Liam never blamed her for it. He understood he had destroyed something that couldn't be rebuilt with a few kind gestures or a handful of promises. He accepted her rules without argument, coming when she allowed it, leaving when she asked, never pushing for more than she was willing to give. Slowly, however, her posture softened. Almost imperceptibly, she no longer stood with her arms crossed at the playground, no longer dismissed him with clipped words when he lingered too long at the door. It was during one of those quiet evenings that Chloe finally spoke words that hurt more deeply than any of her previous anger. "Do you have any idea," she said softly, looking at her hands, "what it felt like to carry them alone? To hear their hearts beating inside me while you were building towers of glass and steel?" Liam's chest tightened with a guilt so sharp he could barely breathe. He had no excuses. All he could whisper was, "I was a coward. I thought strength meant shutting you out. Now I see it was weakness, and if it takes me the rest of my life to prove that to you, to them, then that's what I will do." Chloe didn't respond, but her silence was not the same as rejection. She studied him for a long time, and though her face revealed nothing, Liam thought he saw the slightest flicker of something shifting in her eyes. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps a recognition that he was no longer the same man who had once broken her. The turning point came one rainy afternoon when Sophie tripped and scraped her knee on the playground. Her small cry had Liam running before he even realized he had moved, and he knelt in the mud, holding her as if she were made of glass. When Chloe arrived, she stopped dead in her tracks. Seeing him hold their daughter with such raw fear in his eyes, such desperate tenderness in his voice, was unlike anything she had ever seen from him before. In that moment, something inside her cracked. A piece of the armor she had worn for years splintered away. That night, as he was leaving, Chloe walked him to the door. "You're not forgiven," she said softly, "but you're here, and maybe that's enough for now." As he drove back to the city, the lights of his empire twinkling in the distance, Liam realized he no longer cared for their brilliance. He had spent years building walls, but now he was learning to tear them down brick by brick, all for the family he had once been too blind to see. The scene fades to a quiet, serene backyard. Liam is running, laughing, with Lily and Sophie. He stops and looks at Chloe, who is watching from the porch, smiling. He understood that redemption wasn't about erasing the past, but about choosing differently, every single day. It was about showing up, loving without fear, and proving with actions what words could never repair. That night, after the girls were asleep, Chloe whispered the words he had yearned to hear, though they came not as a grand declaration, but as something quiet and honest. "You're not the man I once knew. You're better, and maybe that's enough for us to try again." Liam closed his eyes. His chest tightened with a mix of relief and gratitude, so overwhelming he couldn't speak. He just nodded, his hand finding hers under the table, their fingers lacing together as if they had been waiting for years for that single moment. For the first time, Liam felt his empire was not built of glass and steel, but of flesh and love. Fragile, but in its own way, unbreakable. He had lost everything once, but fate had given him a second chance, and this time, he wouldn't waste it. As he sat there, listening to the quiet breathing of his daughters in the next room and the constant presence of Chloe beside him, he understood that this was the only victory that mattered. And for the first time in his life, Liam Thorne, the man the world had called unshakable, finally knew what it meant to be whole. What do you think will happen to their family now? Will they be able to truly heal? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories.